Welcome to the latest edition of the Audible, presented by Trader Joe's. I'm Bruce Feldman. That's Stuart Mandel and Ralph Russo. He's going to be joining us every Sunday now to spice up your Sunday mornings. Ralph, good to see your smiling face. Stu's not going to be with us for the whole show today. There's a good reason. Stu's going to be a good dad, and he's going to go get to watch his daughter go play softball. And so he's going to duck out. Probably midway through the show, but we're glad he's doing it. We're glad he's going to get to be there.
Thank you for accommodating me.
Yeah, we're happy for that reason, as opposed to Stu decided to just go.
just decide to bail on us. And we're going to be bad dads and just continue to work on Sunday.
Yeah. So, all right. So you guys know the drill by now. We're on YouTube every Sunday morning at 11:30 a.m. Eastern, 8:30 a.m. Pacific. Find us at youtube.com/@audibleshow. Again, every Sunday morning we're doing it. Obviously, we have multiple other episodes that we're doing, and you can see those as well on YouTube. Wild week 4 again. Some really good games. Some stuff that was kind of mind-blowing, I think, in some regards. Where do you want to start first, guys?
I feel like this was the week of every coach who's considered to be on the hot seat or is going through a rough time, just like made it that much worse. Like just went out and had an even worse loss than they'd had to that point. And I think we can, we're going to talk about guys who might actually get fired, but I think we should start with Dabo, who is absolutely not going to get fired, but man, 1-3 for the first time in his 17-year tenure, and losing badly at home to Syracuse, guys, is not the best look when just a few days earlier you went to a press conference and ranted about how great you've been there over the years. And, hey, if they're tired of winning, then they can get rid of me, right? No, Dabo, they're not tired of winning. They're tired of losing.
It has been an interesting, the micro on this is everybody thought Clemson was going to be kind of back this year. Some of us were a little more skeptical than others, and some of us were a little more bullish than others. But I don't think anybody looked at the first 4 games of Clemson season and said, 1-3, and that's a team that might be looking at its worst season in years. I mean, a couple of years ago, Dabo had a bad one, a 4-4 ACC record. And I just wonder, like Bruce and either of you guys, like, can you go home again to a certain degree? Can you get it turned around? The history behind these great all-time coaches, and Dabo is an all-time great coach, kind of losing it and then getting it back is not great. Like, it never happened for Bobby Bowden. It never happened for of course, now Frank Beamer comes to mind. It's like usually once it starts slipping, it just continues to slip. Joe Paterno was an example of somebody who had a second act that ended up going pretty well on the football field, where it slipped for a little while. There was a Tom Osborne period where it looked like it was getting away from him, and then it ended up being better. But I just feel like generally, once it starts going, it never gets back to where it was.
I'm going to push back a little bit. Like, there's an example of somebody who really started to struggle, and we thought we were kind of writing him off at Michigan. Now I know people will snicker and go, oh yeah, but that was the Connor Stallions part. But Jim Harbaugh ramped it up and became even more Jim Harbaugh than he had been before when he was really getting squeezed at Michigan. I think, and there was an interesting juxtaposition of, it's not the first time, by the way, Syracuse has been a thorn in Clemson's side. Now, it was other coaches at Syracuse, it had been Dino Babers who'd given them problems. Yesterday was Fran Brown, and I think the juxtaposition of Fran Brown and Dabo is kind of interesting. We had him on the show in the offseason. Stu and I were both kind of blown away by Fran Brown, not just his candor, but just, I would say he's very much in tune with modern college football and honestly modern recruiting and just kind of how things are. He's very blunt and direct. Not to say Dabo sugarcoats anything, because yesterday or after his game, it was a very emotional press conference. If you'd listen to how he, how he sounded, how he looked. And whereas Fran Brown, I feel like, is on top of things, Dabo, we've talked about this a lot when it comes directly related to the transfer portal. He was extremely slow to adapt. I mean, he has one of his best defensive players as a transfer from Purdue at defensive end. There's been little spots here and there, but I think it's probably beyond just that. I don't understand. Like, I know the offensive line has been really underwhelming and disappointing. Cade Klubnik doesn't look like a 3-year starter. He's late on a lot of stuff. He just looks like he's not a very experienced quarterback. I think there's some issues. Garrett Riley, who is, done a really good job at a lot of places, but you wonder about the fit there. How committed are they to the run game? Adam Randall, who, by the way, has been a real bright spot for them, converted receiver. When he's gotten the ball, he's been really explosive and made a bunch of big runs and made a bunch of big plays. But this is a team, when you look at it, they're fortunate they beat Troy. They were losing by, 2 touchdowns in that game. You almost want to go back and look. I was talking to my colleague at Fox, Mike Hill, who's an AP voter, and we were talking about, he was like, I'm almost going to rethink the LSU win that they got there, because it looked really impressive. You won at Clemson. There's all these NFL prospects on the team. Well, all of a sudden, Clemson doesn't look very good.
Right.
I don't, blame anything on LSU for that. But the reality is that win that looked really good now doesn't look like, it's, not that impressive because of what Clemson appears to be. I think what's different about this group than, let's say, last year's implosion in Tallahassee with Florida State, again, and this is a screwy metric to use, and I know Stu's going to probably hate it, but you talk to people who are in the NFL personnel world, and they see a bunch of first-round kind of guys. Sammy Brown, who, by the way, can't be in the draft, former 5-star linebacker, can't be in the draft for another year. He's another guy who's really well regarded. There may be 4 or 5 first-round players on the defense, but yet the product is just not good enough. Again, we have a comment from one of our viewers, Jay, who was like, "Why haven't Napier and Dabo been fired already?" Dabo's not getting fired.
Dabo's not getting fired.
Titles. Napier is another story. We'll get to that in a second.
We do keep monitoring our phones for Napier and some other news, but Dabo's not getting fired still.
I mean, Dabo's one of those guys, in my opinion, that has lifetime job security, unless, I don't know, things turn truly south. But I think, Bruce, what's so disheartening, if you're a Clemson fan, is you've been harping for 3 years on the offense. They got to modernize the offense. Why aren't we getting more out of Cade Klubnik? It was very unusual to see a Clemson defense just get shredded like that, and not by Ohio State, right? By Syracuse. Good for Fran Brown. Good for, they won 10 games last year. They lost a bunch of the main guys. They go in and get a win like that. Yeah, there's something more going on there than just Dabo's stubborn and he doesn't like the transfer portal, right? That is definitely, I've given him heat for that for the last few years. But to your point, Bruce, they've got players. They didn't get all those dudes showing up in first round projections out of nowhere, and they're not performing like it. Are they not prepared? I mean, we all thought Tom Allen would be a great hire at DC. Are they not prepared well enough? There's just something, sometimes something's just off, like there was at Florida State last year. But again, I don't put him in the same category as, why don't we talk about a few of these coaches who are most definitely on the hot seat. Mike Gundy loses at home to Tulsa, which had not won in Stillwater since 1951. Not great. Luke Fickell gets destroyed at home by Maryland. Not great. And, I feel like we've been on Billy Napier hot seat watch for 2 years. They lose to Miami. They are now 1-3. I feel bad because I think Florida's defense is great. They're not the problem. But DJ Lagway, Mr. 5-star, is I'm not sure what happened there. Guys, out of those guys I just mentioned, who is in the most imminent trouble?
Well, and again, I think Bruce and I can both attest, we're sort of on guard today. We saw this last week with Brent Pry and Deshaun Foster. Losing to a G5 school at home is a good way to get fired. And that's what Mike Gundy did on Friday. I mean, it seems like that's over. And now, and I'll use this, I describe this a lot, right? When I talk about, when people ask, well, is he going to get fired? He's like, well, I don't know when he's going to get fired, but it's over. Like it's over there. And now it's just a matter of they have to decide, how are we going to do this? Mike Gundy is the winningest coach in the history of this program. He's an alum. He is Oklahoma State football, and it, like with Barry Sanders and a couple of other people, he is Oklahoma State football. So how are we going to do this, Mike? Are we going to ride this out? Are we going to make an announcement that says he's going to be the coach, but this is going to be his last year? Is Gundy going to be a defiant guy like he often is? And he's going to say, no, either I'm here or I'm not. Like, how is this going to play out? That's where we are with Gundy, where I think with the others, it's close to that place with Napier. And with Fickell, I think it's just a lot more complicated when it comes to buyouts and things along those lines. But I think with Mike Gundy, we are now asking the question of how this ends as opposed to whether it's over.
Right. And with Gundy, they had the big restructuring after the standoff with the board last winter. And I think it's also worth noting that if they fire him today, or if they fire him a year and a half from today, the buyout's still $15 million, which is kind of a not the common way these things usually work. I think it's something that they're, like you said, Ralph and I talked about this a lot Friday and talked a lot about it, I think even yesterday morning. It's just, look, this feels like Justin Williams was on this podcast not that long ago, maybe like 3 weeks ago, and did a terrific story that holds up very well now on The Athletic. And I think we see, again, another guy who, I don't want to say like Gundy, but just felt like he is better served in a different era of college football. And it was just 2 years ago where they were pretty good. So it's not like it completely was falling apart. It just kind of collapsed at one point. And, I think it's a matter of just as soon as when and how do they want to do it. Whereas, and I'll get to Fickell in a second, but Napier, I think what's changed a lot. So this time last year, his seat was really hot. What was different was the AD Scott Strickland was really attached to him more. He was an AD who was also under a lot of pressure and on the hot seat himself. And then two things changed. One, Napier and his team helped get him off the hot seat. They went on a run in the second half of the season. And the other big part of this was the basketball coach who Scott Strickland hired, Todd Golden, went out and won a national title. And that was a big deal. And Strickland got an extension, and he's not in jeopardy like he was before. I think with Florida, now we know that they have this brutal stretch that they're in the middle of the schedule on, is sometimes with coaches on the hot seat, what ends up happening is the administration will yank the plug out of the wall because they don't want somebody coaching their way back into, oh man, can't fire this guy. Like that happens more times than I think people realize. So I think Florida is going to be in the midst of a coaching search, probably not too far down the road, just because, as you said, Stu, the offense, DJ Legway is very talented. Now, I don't know how much practice reps he's been able to have over the last, 6 months. And they played a really good defense at Miami. Miami is going to get after a lot of people. But I just, you're looking at it going, this is not going to be good enough at this point of Billy Napier's tenure. I thought it would have gone one direction. Then the USF game happened. And I feel like now all of a sudden it's hard to see a path forward. I want to ask you guys on Fickell, because he did such a good job at Cincinnati. He started out he hired Phil Longo to run an air raid style offense the first year, so far counter to the perception of what Wisconsin football was. Yesterday, they were a favorite against Maryland, and they got dominated. Like, if you're a Wisconsin fan, you have people leaving right after jump around. What do we think is going to happen here? Because it was a very big surprise, I felt like, when they pulled the rug out from under Paul Chryst, who'd won a lot more games. And now here we are at Wisconsin. This doesn't seem to be working.
Yeah, I mean, as Ralph said, the it's a much bigger buyout, right? I mean, do you remember when they fired Paul Chryst? What a big deal it was. I think his buyout was supposed to be like close to 20 million, but they basically said like, we'll pay you up front to go away.
Yeah,
if you'll
11. They
reduce it to
negotiated
11,
it down to
right?
11. Yeah.
Well, that's paltry compared to Fickell's is 25 million. And again, like only 3 years after, like I think this whole thing is kind of embarrassing for Chris McIntosh because I think a lot of people were pretty surprised that he pulled the plug on Paul Chryst so abruptly. It wasn't like, I mean, they had started to fall back, but it wasn't like it was a disaster. Then the fan base there was fully expecting him to promote Jim Leonard. Did not do that. Went out and got Fickell, which made perfect sense at the time, like you said, Bruce. Like coming off just an amazing run at Cincinnati. But I just think from day one, it hasn't proven to be a good fit, and they have a brutal schedule the rest of the way. You could see this getting to be like a 3-9 at best kind of situation. So I do think they have to make the move. It's going to be a very expensive move, but I don't know that it does any good to, like, I don't think they go out and fire him tomorrow, but and I would say this with Napier too, like once your record starts to get really, really bad, it's kind of like you might as well just do it, right? You might as well just get it over with. I would just say real quick in the Florida situation, the defense is playing really well. They're not getting blown out. That might be a situation where we've seen this before, where you fire the head coach, you promote the interim, and suddenly they start playing better. I mean, because I feel like they're not that far off, but they also have Texas and Texas A&M the next 2 weeks, at which point they might be 1-5.
Ralph, let me ask you a question here. So I got asked this the other day on Fox, on our studio show, which was, what's exactly happened to this guy, Luke Fickell? He did such a really good job. And the one thing I've heard from talking to people is, you got to remember, probably the two best pieces that he had on the Cincinnati program that he had are now coaching in South Bend. Mm-hmm. One's Marcus Freeman running the program. The other one's Mike Denbrock, who did a really good job with offense. And it just feels like they're a little bit lost. If they go in this direction, I know this name came up the other day when we talked about UCLA. It's Pat Fitzgerald. What I had heard, a scenario that one industry source had presented to me was, that this would go in this direction. And then maybe if Scott Satterfield's really struggling, Fickell goes back. As you look at the landscape here, I know we'll kind of wrap up on hot seat stuff in a second, but is that appealing if you're Wisconsin? I know we talked about Lance Leipold possibly, and he just, he's doing well at Kansas. He's a Wisconsin guy. But if you're Wisconsin, do you feel like you have good options now? You have better options? Because as you said, $25 million is a lot of money for almost any school, except for maybe Texas A&M or Texas.
Yeah. It would be the second largest buyout ever behind the monster, almost 78 million that A&M gave to Jimbo Fisher. So we were gaming this out, Stu and I, before we even went on air here, and that was this idea of the buyout's less if you let go of him early, it gives him a chance to get another job. I can't imagine. I mean, as bad as it has been, I can't imagine that Luke Fickell wouldn't be in play somewhere in the country, even if it's back down to G5. As you mentioned, the Cincinnati situation. Now, it's not that bad at Cincinnati yet. It could get that way, and I think there is a short leash on Scott Satterfield. So, yeah, I could see you start playing the landscape game to say, how can we save some money here? How can we get ahead of our coaching search? I know you keep bringing up the Fitzgerald thing, and I'm not saying that couldn't happen, especially, again, like he's on the sideline. You could get in the game pretty quickly. With Leipold there, I would probably really want a chance to talk to him. So I think Wisconsin might have, and listen, the other thing too is we talk about $25 million and this and that. There's a math problem here. If there are 40,000 people showing up to Camp Randall the rest of the season, maybe you can't afford not to fire him. I would also say very last thing on this, it sort of goes back to my point all the time when I point at like James Franklin and Brian Kelly and these guys who people say are overrated. You don't start becoming a disaster. You don't start losing it until you start losing games you're supposed to win. And that's where we are with Dabo, just to tie a bow on it. And that's what's so shocking about what's going on with Clemson, is that Clemson is now losing games it's supposed to win.
Guys, there was I think a dearth of like really exciting down to the wire games on Saturday. Perhaps the most interesting was Oklahoma-Auburn. Oklahoma wins 24-17. Just a tremendous defensive performance. They had tied a school record with 9 sacks. But I think the story people are going to be talking about from that game is that one of Oklahoma's touchdowns shouldn't have counted. Early second quarter, one of their receivers does the old, hey, look like I'm going to go off on the sideline for a substitution. No, I'm not. Runs down the field, wide open touchdown. This was such a missed call that the SEC, and they don't do this very often, felt compelled to put out a statement after the game saying the officials blew that, that using what they refer to as a hideout tactic is considered unsportsmanlike conduct, 15-yard penalty. So imagine being Hugh Freeze today. You lost by 7 points, and the SEC fully acknowledges Oklahoma got 7 points they shouldn't have.
And there was a couple things that happened in that game. We were watching it where it looked like Auburn got a defensive touchdown on the, early in the game. It got called back because they said the receiver didn't have, control of the ball at that point, even though he'd taken a couple of steps. So there was a couple of things that were I'm sure Auburn is looking at it going, all right, and there was that, and then there was that. But this, I was talking to Coach Peterson during, when we watched this back on video, he was like, this should never have, how did they miss this? Like, this is something that they're supposed to be like having an awareness for, and they didn't. And it's, this wasn't a game that they like where Oklahoma won by 3 touchdowns. I mean, this game was decided by a touchdown. I felt like at a lot of times, look, John Napier made some good throws and some good plays, but I felt like Auburn played giving up 10 sacks, went toe to toe with them, and at times was more impressive. And so, again, we're not in a world of college football where it's like, okay, this one game is going to decide a playoff now. But you never know. We'll see how Auburn goes from this. We'll see how Oklahoma goes from this. I mean, remember like the 5th down game in the old Big 12 from 30 years ago. Like, there's moments like this that kind of live. I feel like, I was at a game also in the Big 12. It was at Oklahoma State. I think it was Oklahoma State, Kansas State, where they botched that with the chain crew. But to me, this, in the technology days that we have, and it's the SEC, this is not the Sun Belt. This is not Conference USA. It's just surprising that it got missed.
Very surprising. And I'd love to have a conversation with an official to sort of see what they see on that and why it could get missed like that. A few other big games. So, talking about Nebraska, Oklahoma's old rival, Nebraska, and the Cornhuskers host Michigan in a game that I felt like was a measuring stick game for Nebraska. We'll see how the rest of the season plays out, but there was a lot of hope around Nebraska that, hey, maybe they're a fringe dark horse playoff team. They just haven't had one of these games literally in almost a decade. I think it's now 28 straight games against ranked opponents that Nebraska has lost. Shout out to Matt Brown, who is one of our editors here at The Athletic. I believe it's the second longest to Rutgers in the country. It's the second longest losing streak, either by time, like distance, like in like years that they have gone, or the actual losing streak. I think it's the actual losing streak to Rutgers. That is staggering. So Michigan comes in here and we're thinking, oh, this is a chance for Dylan Raiola to sort of assert himself, and Nebraska is back kind of moment. And they certainly played fairly well, the Cornhuskers did. It was a competitive game, but my overall takeaway is still a team that is building along the lines, and I'd be pretty excited if I'm a Michigan fan, thinking I can be in this playoff race and be in this Big Ten race, especially with the way the schedule lays out. But you're just still looking at a Nebraska team that, I know it's year 3 for Matt Rule, and maybe you want them farther ahead, but there are still places on this roster where they're not stacking up with the best in the Big Ten.
I feel like, I had like several games on at once. That was a pretty active window. And that every time my eyes turned back to the Michigan game, their offensive line was just like blowing up huge holes. There goes Bryce Underwood right down the middle, not touched. Justice Haynes, Jordan Marshall. It was pretty, if you're a Nebraska fan, it was pretty humbling the way they got dominated, frankly, on both lines of scrimmage, because they also gave up 7 sacks. For Michigan,
they didn't run the ball well themselves. Big Red can't stop the run, can't run the ball. There's nothing more.
Dylan Raiola was supposed to be the savior, but he's I feel like he's really good. He's doing everything he can. He's not getting a whole lot of help. Do you guys now reconsider Michigan at all? Or after the Oklahoma game, it was, they're not there yet, right? Like last year was a down year, and maybe they're not quite, but like. First of all, I think we're seeing that Oklahoma is going to be pretty good. Do you think Michigan? I'll give you 2 choices, and I might not be able to stick around to hear the answers. By the way, can Michigan reach the Big Ten title game? And if short of that, can they make the playoff as like the 3rd or 4th Big Ten team?
Ralph, why don't you go? Because I want to answer and then go from there.
So I think I'm going to say yes, only because I picked them to do that before the season. So it's easy for me to just be, confirmation bias. I will say this. I'll pat myself on the back. I did see a situation where this could be Michigan's evolution, where they struggled against Oklahoma. It gives Underwood a little more time. Now you go into Nebraska, a team that you probably match up better against. Maybe your identity has coalesced. You're taking steps forward. And again, the schedule, they don't play Oregon. They don't play Indiana. They don't play Penn State. Like, you could see a situation here where like they roll into that Ohio State game at the end of the season very much in the mix to play in the Big Ten championship game, even if they are a step behind the elite teams, Bruce, in the Big Ten.
Yeah, I would be if I was a Michigan fan, I would like that the offensive line looked a lot better this time around. As you said, Oklahoma, we just saw them get 10 sacks against Auburn. Like that is a good defense. It is a tough place to play on the road. I like a lot of what we're seeing from Bryce Underwood, how he's playing, how he's using his legs more and more. Justice Haynes has been a terrific addition. Again, the O-line is better. The defense has still been pretty good. It helped to have Marlon Klein back. He's a playmaker, tight end on a team that doesn't have a lot of outside help. I do think they're one receiver away from being like I think they can make the playoff because of, a bunch of different factors. And I think Underwood by the end of the year could be pretty special, but I think they're one receiver away from being like a real top 5, top kind of 10 team. Now you could laugh and say that one receiver is Jeremiah Smith, but I think even it's like, there's probably 10 or 15 receivers in the country better than what Michigan's best option is. And I think that limits them. Now, they didn't have great receivers when they won the national title, but they were much better on the offensive line. And, I think that they were a much more experienced team, but I would be very encouraged by what I saw if I was a Michigan fan. Now, the team that I do think is a playoff team, to me, I don't want to say they were a revelation yesterday, but the biggest, I'm fascinated to see how this goes. I don't think it's going to go great. And boy, was I wrong, was what happened in Salt Lake City. Texas Tech, who we have talked a lot about how much money they have spent to basically compete for a national title. And they spent a ton of money on the D-line, it's over $5 million. David Bailey, Romello Height, 3 guys inside, spent a bunch of money on the O-line too. And I thought what was so impressive was they played a Utah team that, maybe is not quite as good as we thought, but that's not fair to Texas Tech because it's still a tough place to play. They went in there and they basically look like, at one point you're looking at the jerseys, reds of, red, and it almost looked like on a given day, this could have been reversed. And honestly, Texas Tech looked like Utah, and Utah looked a little like Texas Tech. It got in the fourth quarter. Morgan Scalley's terrific defense coordinator. There was a coverage bust that Will Hammond, by the way, you're playing now with the backup. He's really talented, but he's still the backup. Hadn't played much, especially in significant moments. And he played really, really well. And then, going into the season, they lose Quentin Joyner, who's one of the transfer guys they were excited about, a good running back from USC. They're depleted in the run game. Cameron Dickey ran hard, ran like a Utah running back, just broke tackles and gave them the physicality. And so I want to bring this forward. Is Texas Tech a team that you think not just would have the inside track to win the Big 12? Let's not stop there after we saw yesterday. Do you think they're good enough to make a run in the playoff?
Are they good enough to win a playoff game?
I think they're definitely good enough to win a playoff game. I do. The question I have is, can they? I think it's a little bit too. I don't want to put it all the way out there saying, can they make a run at the national title? I don't think. I feel like there's a step there that they've taken a big step. It seems like there's another big step they would need to take, but I think they can win playoff games though.
Yeah, their defense is super impressive, and you're right. They were super physical. They looked a lot like Utah would be. The odd thing is, in the context of the question that you just asked, which is, can they, make a run in the playoff? Right? Can they win multiple playoff games? I would actually spin it back to the offense, which is weird for Texas Tech, right? Do they have enough game-changing players at the skill positions as good as Hammond was? Interesting to see how that goes going forward with Baron Morton, and which way they take that position when Morton is healthy enough to play. As you said, you're down to sort of a second running back, but it's still a good running back in Dickey. And are you as explosive at receiver as the teams that we tend to think of as national championship contenders are? I'm not really sure about that. But the team is good, and they are getting their money's worth. I would also say, just to flip it back to Utah for a second, I think there was a little bit of Utah getting exposed there, and I think the Utes could still be really good and can still end up maybe even playing for a Big 12 championship down the road. Maybe we see a rematch of this game. I do think what ended up happening was you saw, Napier is a very good player, but man, if he has to be a passer and they are so limited at receiver, that's a big issue. I mean, I think he threw for something like 150 yards on 35 passes. It's 4 yards a throw is not working. And he doesn't have a big arm. Again, I think he's a good player and a fun player, but they are really boxed into what they want to be and how that translates into being successful. I want to pivot to the other big game that we thought we had penciled in, these two big ranked versus ranked matchups, and both of them turned out to be kind of duds. And Indiana, for all that Texas Tech did to Utah, what Indiana did to Illinois was just, I guess it shouldn't be shocking, right? Because this is what Coach Siggs just does to, opponents, aside from a couple of games when they get on top and they get rolling, they don't take the foot off the brake. And right now, the discussion about the Big Ten, I think, might have to include not just what's the result of Penn State, Oregon next week? What happens when Penn State plays Ohio State? Now I think we have to start saying, what happens when Indiana plays at Penn State? What happens in a few weeks when Indiana plays at Oregon? I think what they did was so impressive, the Hoosiers, that it might make you have to reassess the entire conference at the top.
Yeah, they execute so well. It reminded me a little bit of when Nebraska played them last year. We were at that game. It was in Bloomington also. And they jumped all over them and just started picking them apart. And then all of a sudden it was like, how many points are they going to run up on these guys? It got ugly. And, we were talking about this a lot in the studio as the game was going on. And it's going to take a really, really good team to beat Indiana. I feel like Indiana, the way Cignetti has run that program, is not going to beat themselves, right? So they're going to take advantage of everything they can from you, and you better be either way, way more talented than them. And right now, to be honest, you know, I was want to talk about Fernando Mendoza a little later in the show, but the way he is playing, there's no quarterback in the country right now playing better than him, right? Like John Mateer has been fun to watch, and he's a really good dual threat guy, and he gives you a lot in the run game. But for Fernando Mendoza, you know, some of the people we know who do a lot of NFL draft stuff were pretty intrigued and excited by him. But he is just playing at an incredibly high level if he can sustain it. And I don't know. I saw what I saw last year. I was at, you know, when they played Ohio State, but I think they're going to be a big problem in the Big Ten. It was not like I noticed their social media team put out, like, because everybody's asking who's going to be this year's Indiana, and they just basically put out still Indiana, and good on them, because they should be puffing their chests out about it.
Though I would say, I think the reason why, I understand what they're trying to do there, and it definitely grabs hold of the Coach Siggs vibe, which is, you know, Coach Siggs even said after that game, and this is a good lesson for all of us. Hey, I know what Illinois did to Duke, but Duke turned the ball over 4 times, and Illinois couldn't block Duke up front. So we had a pretty good feeling that they weren't going to be able to block us too. And my point being is that, like, you got to judge the result. The most important thing that happens is who wins or loses, because going forward, wins and losses are what get you to your destination. But when you're assessing these teams, you got to look under the hood a little bit. And I think Illinois, I had been skeptical about them even coming into the season, that they played over their heads last year. And I understand they still have a veteran team. I still think they'll be an interesting and a good team. Next week against USC will be an interesting bounce back situation. But, like, under the hood, Indiana is a Maserati. Under the hood, Illinois, kind of like a Subaru. And I drive a Subaru, so there's nothing wrong with a Subaru. But under the hood, you know, Indiana looks like a Maserati. And I think what you said is also interesting to me, Bruce, in that, like, how do you beat them? They are not a bunch of 4- and 5-star talents. So if you saw how Ohio State and Notre Dame beat them last year, they just had a preponderance of better players, right? So you could hit the dude button and Caleb Downs returns a punt for a touchdown, and you hit the dude button if you're Notre Dame, and Bryce Love and Jeremiah Love goes 80 yards for a touchdown. That's how I think you beat Indiana. But man, you better be on your P's and Q's, because they're not beating themselves. They are super well coached. You know, somebody had texted me during the beatdown they gave to Indiana State. And by the way, they beat Illinois almost as bad as they beat Indiana State. Somebody texted me during that game. They were at that game, and they were like, listen, I know this is Indiana State, but these guys look amazing. They do everything perfect. Every play looks like it's supposed to look like. Yeah, Coach Siggs, man, he's got a juggernaut there. And we just, again, when you're assessing what this is going to be in the Big Ten, you got to include Indiana as to what this might be.
Yeah, I think also, like, Oregon, you know, lit people up. Obviously, Oklahoma State was certainly won the 69-3 game, but it was like, okay, they're not playing anybody close to their competition. They're just executing at a really high level. Dante Moore is. I think what's a little different with Oregon, you'll see flashes like Kenyon Sadiq is a different kind of weapon, you know. But like Indiana has very good receivers. Yeah, I just don't know. You look at him like, okay, this is a matchup nightmare. Those are the things that you assume often differentiate when good plays really good. You know, the one guy who's the best player on the field but if your quarterback is the best player and he has elevated his game from last year being good to great, and we got to see it a lot more, right? You know, Illinois is a good team. They're not a great team, and they don't have a ton of weaknesses, but whatever they do have, Indiana exploited it, and like you said, never took its foot off the gas. So,
two quick things I want to do to wrap up that. Should note, again, exploiting a weakness, Illinois was banged up in the secondary, and again, Coach Siggs and staff there, they pounded Mike Shanahan, the offensive coordinator. They pounded that. Yeah, the other Mike Shanahan. They pounded that secondary because they understood that like things weren't perfect back there for Illinois. I want to just tie a bow on this one to go back to Texas Tech for just a second. So during the offseason, a Texas Tech fan was emailing a lot of national college football writers. You're about to see what an SEC roster looks like in the Big 12. And, you know, to a certain degree, we kind of poo-pooed it or just was like, all right, buddy, we'll check out. Yeah, so far, so good. So far, that looked a little like an SEC roster in the Big 12 for Texas Tech. Want to move on to some players who impressed. I think you sort of already gave a
I tipped my hand
of the hat. You tipped your hand on that one. So yeah let's just roll into that. Yeah,
Fernando Mendoza is like, you know, almost like, I don't want to say been perfect, but he's been so impressive with what he's done. I knew he was good. I didn't think he was this good, right? And again, credit to the guys and it at IU. By the way, good hire for Signetti. Added Chandler Whitmer. I don't know if you know people remember him. He's like an Elite 11 quarterback way back in the day. That's when I first met him. He was coaching in the NFL out here in Los Angeles for a while. They added him. I think that's a good addition when they lost Tino Sinceri. Just seems like all the things they put together to maximize what they have. It's impressive, man. They are. Again, I'm not saying they're going to run the table, but you better take them seriously. Who stood out to you?
Yeah, and well, just as one other thing, Mendoza. A lot of the NFL people, again, people who do the scouty stuff, were saying he could be QB1. I think that caught a lot of folks off guard. And man, now he absolutely. I mean, if you look at the guys who we think of in that discussion, he has absolutely had the best start to the season. So I want to play off we picked breakout players during the week and guys to keep an eye on. And I got the wrong TCU receiver. Sorry, folks. I had pointed out Jordan Dwyer going into the Idaho transfer, going into the SMU game. And it turns out it was Dwyer had a few catches. He was fine. It turned out Eric McAllister was the guy who just decimated SMU. Talk about how, Stu was like, hey, every time I looked up, it seemed like a Michigan running back was just flying down the field untouched. Every time I looked up at SMU TCU, Eric McAllister was, flying down the field behind the SMU secondary. I think it was, I don't have the stats in front of me. I need to do a better job about being on top of that. I think it was like 230, 10 catches, 230 and 3 touchdowns, or 245 and 3 touchdowns.
It was 8 catches for 254 yards and 3 touchdowns, averaging 32 yards a catch. So if you play fantasy college football, I hope he was on your team this weekend.
Yeah, he's a big dude too. As you guys pointed out to me before the show, like not a this year transfer, but a guy who was at Boise State and moved over to the Big 12. And boy, TCU, I feel like that's the Big 12 team going a little bit under the radar. And TCU Arizona State next weekend.
We have that game on Friday night on Fox.
Yeah, that's a good Friday night game.
It is a good Friday night game. Looking forward to it.
All right, so we should do Stu's now too, because Stu left us stuff to do, right? It's not just that Stu bails early; he just gives us his work and hands it off to us. But Stu's player who impressed is we mentioned Maryland in what they did to Wisconsin. Malik Washington, the freshman quarterback. There's a handful of true freshman quarterbacks around the country, and that have really, grabbed attention early in the season. I don't know if there's anything more impressive than Washington going into Camp Randall and playing really well against the Badgers. I know the Badgers aren't great, but really their offense is their bigger issue. Defensively, I think they can hang around a little bit before their offense lets them down and then they break. And I think that's the case. Malik Washington definitely looks like a stud, and a guy who, as we talked about with some other guys in this position, if Maryland can keep him, is someone Maryland can build around going forward.
Yeah, and that feeds into my shout out, which is Mike Loxley. Last year, people were like, hey, is he is he going to be out of here? You know, I know he had done a pretty good job and had some sustained success, which at that place, it's almost never happened in football, or it hasn't in a long time. He was able to do that, shook up his staff some, added in some good portal additions, especially, you know, at receiver and tight end. He's got this young quarterback, and Loxley's a really good offensive coach. Remember, he did a very good job when he was at Alabama. I think he was, you know, on the front end of the curve on the RPO game. And they held, again, some of this is certainly Wisconsin, but they held them scoreless for a long part of that game. And they're 4-0. I'm not saying they're going to be a playoff team, but I think they have some momentum now because you have this young quarterback who is a pretty big get for them. And if you can build some more pieces around him, you know, Loxley's really good had a lot of ties in that DMV area where there is a lot of talent there. You know, it's interesting to see when a coach kind of gets a lot more momentum after people are starting to write him off. And that's kind of where this feels like right now. And we'll see how much more they can sustain this year if they can build on it. But, you know, they have a chance to be an upper division Big Ten team, which I'm not sure a lot of people saw that coming at the start of the year.
Beware September Maryland, though, Bruce. The Terps tend to get off the good starts and then flatline a little bit. I would say, though, I don't want to play the schedule game. Their schedule lays out nicely. Even before the season, we had noted that, like, in some ways, this could work to Loxley's detriment because the schedule lays out nicely. If they don't win these games, it could be a big problem. But I think there is a path here for things to ratchet the temperature down without question. It already has,
Yeah.
and for Locks to stabilize things a little bit and now start looking towards building off of a good season as opposed to just digging out and trying to save your job. Our shout out, or my shout out and Stu's shout out, are somewhat similar because we're going a little deeper cut here to just shout out a couple of programs who are having more success than I think we would have pegged them to have at the beginning of the year. For Stu, it's Rice, which is off to a 3-1 start. Again, they're not knocking down any giants, but Rice hasn't been 3-1 since 2001. Wow. Went on the road on Thursday and did a really nice job against Charlotte. Again, not a very good Charlotte team. New coach there. It's Scott Abel. Scott Abel is the new coach there. Brought in this fun option offense, triple option offense, which is really cool to watch if you're just a ball knower. So good job on Rice. Shout out for Stu. Goes to Rice. Shout out for me goes to Delaware at 3-1. This is a school that is moving up from FCS to FBS. You know, there has been some success stories there. I don't know if we were expecting it to be Delaware. I think a lot of us figured that might be a little bit bumpy this year, even though it's a program that has traditionally done great in FCS. But I think, again, like it seemed like this might be a little bit of a tricky start, and maybe in the long run it is. But, you know, played competitively against Colorado, beat FIU, which just came off of a win against FAU. Again, the bar is kind of low for these transitioning schools. And if you're at 3-1 already in Conference USA, you can start having a conversation about, hey, like we can, you know, maybe go bowling or have a real serious, like, be in the mix in Conference USA. Though I actually think they're in a transition year, so I'm not 100% sure if they can go bowling. I forgot to check on that one.
Hey, one other before we go, which was, you know, we mentioned it in passing, but related to Mike Gundy, for Tulsa to win that game, again, it's the first time head coach Trey Lamb. He's like a legacy coach. His uncle and grandfather and dad were all, you know, very successful coaches in the Deep South. Justin Moore, who is a former, you know him well too, former Texas A&M pitcher, who his first year, it was really first big opportunity as an AD job. I mean, that's a huge win for that program, I think. And again, Tulsa's had success before. Wasn't that long ago where, you know, they were, I want to say it was like in
Philip Montgomery. Yeah, they gave Cincinnati a run the years Cincinnati was good under Fickell. They like playing.
And they were good, you know, back in the Gus Malzahn days of where he had that loaded staff with Mike Norvell was on it. Herb Hand was there, a bunch of guys. And I think Paul Smith was the quarterback, and felt like they were, you know, I don't know if they were like a 10-2 team, but they were really good back then. So a nod to Tulsa, and they're first-year guys.
Well, how do you think I did, Bruce?
Well, you're doing pretty good until that last.
I was doing great until I called you Stu. How did you think I did on the first live show? We okay? We're gonna have you back.
We're gonna have you back, Ralph, and hopefully Stu is not berating any other parents at this sporting event that he's taken in. So,
you want to take us home, Bruce?
Yes. First of all, like, we've gotten some really good questions into the mailbag. So as always, send your questions to the audiblepod@gmail.com. And Ralph, help me out. What else do I need to say before we come?
What you need to say is
top 45 poll next.
Yes. What you need to say is every episode is now on YouTube at the Audible Show. We're live on Sundays like today. We'll be back Tuesday for more of the Audible, sponsored by Trader Joe's. That's what you're supposed to say, Bruce.
Well done. And that's why we're paying you the big bucks to spruce this place up.